but it happens. So if you're here now, make sure you go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you come back for the next video. We are going to get into an interesting discussion today because as we round this last corner of the election season, I think it's very important that we have a real conversation about our mainstream media. Bear with me a moment. I have been probably more inundated with interesting yet questionable information over the course of the last, let's say, 60 days or so. Enough so that my brain is basically swirling. Because if you go in one direction, you see one perspective, right? And I'm talking about mainstream media. I'm talking about the news, right? If you watch certain channels, and everybody knows this, but I just feel like it's been so much more directed this election cycle. Maybe I wasn't paying attention as much before. I don't know. I just know that in the current time, if you change between channels, you will find some very interesting perspectives on not just the election, but just a lot of things. And, you know, here at Purge of the BS, we are very adamant about the term follow the money, right? So when you start looking at who invests in these different media platforms, you're like, okay, well, if this group is investing in this, of course they wouldn't want the people that they're giving money to say something negative about them. That makes perfect sense. I get it. It doesn't necessarily make it right, though. Because if we're going for information, we want information. We don't really want opinioned information. We don't want blind-spotted information. We don't want omission-based information, if that makes sense. We want everything on the plate, and then we want to decide how we want to eat it. You know, do we want to eat the mashed potatoes first, or do you want to have this salad on the side first? We want it all on the table, and then we want to be able to then pull from that table and feed, you know, whatever it is inside of us that we're trying to feed. But nowadays, I can see, and I'm telling you, I really started looking at it. I can see how a person who may not be 100% mentally can get militarized by watching some of the media, some of the rhetoric that the mainstream media will repeat in a 30-minute news cycle for 24 hours straight, making sure that everybody hears the same phrase. And you know what repetition does? Repetition puts things in your brain and to a point it creates an inception and makes you think it might even be your organic opinion. And I thought about that. I was like, you know what? It's very hard to have conversations with people on opposite sides of floods of information, right? Because they've been inundated with so much information. Part of that information is that same news media saying, don't let them lie to you. Don't let them tell you this. And then when you hear it, you're like, oh, well, that's what they told me not to listen for. And you follow suit. A lot of us do. But I've said this to the folks before. I've said it before. If you've got a 30-minute news program, right, that repeats for 24 hours a day in the United States, right, I just can't believe that that's all there is to talk about. So, of course, it's a paid agenda, right? So we're going to go over this video real quick because it was a really cool video that PBS put out. Yes, PBS on Purge of the BS. It's like crazy, right? The Matrix is crashing right now. It's a glitch. But I wanted you guys to check out some of the underlying, I'm not going to say underlying terminology, but some of the underlying concepts that exist within the media bias and why it makes sense. And before I get started, make sure you hit that like button. Bang it. Make sure you hit that bell. And you make sure you come back for the next new videos. I got shorts dropping. It's constantly something. Just, you know what to do. Bring this over here. Let the PBSers talk about PBS. So nonetheless, they did a study on people who were on opposite sides of the same idea, right? And they also did a study on which news networks they were watching. And they also dug into who actually funds those networks. So if you think about how big money works, right? If you have enough money and there's enough people on your payroll, especially if you have a media outlet, yeah, you could pretty much get them to say the Loch Ness Monster is chilling out front smoking a cigarette. And if you get the right people saying it and get a couple of AI-generated pictures, you'll have the whole world believing it. That's crazy to think, but you guys know I'm right. You know I'm right. You can come up with a story with a little bit of sprinkles of what seems like evidence, blow it all the way up, push it into people's heads every 30 minutes with repetition, bow, 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 and they start hearing it, and before you know it, you got a zombie crew walking around believing something that's not even true. And we see it all the time now. We see it all the time now. That's why alternative media like YouTube and like what Persia BS and some of those other channels out there, that's why they're coming up, is because people are tired of being stuck to one side or the other because someone is paid for someone to push you into that direction. We're human. Humans love information. Most of us. Some people would prefer to be ignorant, but to each his own, right? So anyway, let's check out what the Pibs are talking about over here, okay? Hold on.
I listen to Newsmax. I will go to CNN to see what they're saying.
Jerry Levasseur is a Republican committeewoman in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Do we want to do heavy traffic time, like 4 to 7 again? Or do you,
Absolutely.
okay.
On a hot evening this July, she and a handful of fellow Republicans were working on their plans to show support.
Now, let's just start here. We're using our stereotypes early. When she mentioned another group of Republicans, it was just a bunch of Caucasian folks out in, wherever they're at. I just think that, a lot of times they miss the diversity of the U.S. and they focus on a very small group, and then that group then represents a lot of people. But in this case, it does work because it does show about how the media is dealing with different groups of people. So I'll let it go.
For former President Trump, while Fox News played in the background.
To enforce their vision for America, but it's not based off meritocracy. It's based off racism, quite frankly, and it's based off neo-Marxism.
I think that President Trump gets not that Fox is pro-Trump, but I think he gets a better interpretation of his values and what he stands for from Fox. MSNBC is much more likely to insult Republicans as opposed to insulting a Democrat.
The Supreme Court is a clear and present danger to their entire political agenda.
Across town, Demet Haksever, who immigrated to the United States from Turkey in 1975, is watching MSNBC.
In the morning, I start watching MSNBC, Morning Joe, CNN, sometimes PBS, other sources, BBC, and at night I tune in to MSNBC.
Haksever is a retired economist who's now involved with Indivisible, a grassroots political group dedicated to opposing the Republican Party. And why do you prefer MSNBC, you say?
Well, I like their focus on the issues that are important to me.
What about Fox?
Oh, Fox? No, I gave up on Fox a long time ago.
Haksever and Levasseur are not unique. A 2023 survey by the Associated Press found that 26% of Democrats and 60% of Republicans have little or no trust in the news media.
Hold up, guys. I hope y'all heard
research
that.
by YouGov in 2024 showed Democrats were more likely.
All right, so before I let this continue through, what they were saying is throughout the population, about 60% of Republicans and roughly 25% of Democrats feel like they cannot trust the media, right? Then you go to the next slide, and the most trusted media sources for those particular numbers are skewed heavily in one direction. So it almost forces this smaller group to just be like relentless with theirs if they're coming up against that many people on the opposing view, right? So hold on, let me let these folks talk about it.
To trust a wider range of sources than Republicans, who are far more inclined, like Levasseur, to primarily trust Fox and Newsmax.
And this
the
is
national
PBS,
news
so
is more polarized, certainly on broadcast and cable, and it's much less reportage and much more opinion.
Martha Minow is a professor and former dean of Harvard Law School, whose book, Saving the News, looks at how the news media has been transformed under declining government regulation and increasing economic and political pressure.
Political parties funded newspapers in the 1840s, 50s, 60s. The journalism that developed in the 1880s into the golden age of the 1960s was the first time that objectivity was elevated as an ideal, that really recognized we need multiple sources, we need to be transparent, we need to actually document, we need to have a counterpoint.
well, people always felt like that. She was saying that that was the first time it was introduced, that like objectivity was introduced. And no, people had different ideals. They always did. Whether or not they were allowed to speak on them was a little different. And then she also mentions earlier in that same clip that loosening of regulations is what allowed things to kind of take a different turn. So let's say this. In the beginning, media was print, and somebody's regulation says you cannot be on one side or the other. You can't accept money from these types of organizations. You can't put these types of people as headlines. Like it tries to keep folks in the middle. Then somebody loosened up who could pay for it. That's what changed. And that's why it became mainstream media. Initially, it was just, you know, you had newspapers in the area that you were in, and they covered the news because the journalists kind of communicated with each other. Now, I know I'm going back into the 1800s and stuff like that, but it was just print media. So only so many people had like the means to fund the media, because it could only fund like the local media, if that makes sense. So anyway, let me get back to this craziness.
From CBS News.
Make sure you hit that like button too.
To be good business.
I'll take you all to school today. It's Friday. We're going to chill out real quick.
Newspapers and broadcasters had an incentive to aim for objectivity.
This picture has just been transmitted by wire.
In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, television news reporting was primarily limited to the three major networks, CBS, ABC, and NBC. With only a handful of channels available for broadcast, the government issued licenses to the networks and also put regulations in place to ensure fair treatment in their coverage.
It's
like
crazy
the
to have
Fairness
the
Doctrine,
PBS logo and watch
enacted in
PBS.
1949.
The Fairness Doctrine was part of the entrance of the federal government in the regulation of access to the airwaves for television, radio.
This is where it happened.
You have to have balance. And if there is a presentation of one point of view, you have to have a contrary point of view. If a public official were attacked, they had a right to reply.
Good evening, I'm David Walker.
And I'm Lois Hart. Now here's the news.
But as cable TV
CNN.
grew in popularity and dozens of new channels came on the air, all viewers had to do to get a contrary point of view was change the channel, in theory. So the fairness doctrine was phased
Hold up, I might
out
have to
by
add some
President
sound
Ronald
behind this. Hold on a
Reagan's
second.
FCC in 1987, setting the stage for a radical transformation in the way Americans got their news.
I think a lot of people now turn to the media to be reinforced in what they believe, rather than to learn something new.
Minnow says cable networks like MSNBC, Fox News, and others now pursue smaller audiences on the left or the right, sometimes called narrowcasting, by leaning into opinion coverage that those viewers will agree with.
Kamala Harris has a horrific track record, even worse public persona.
She has different superpowers and different areas she will need to work on to appeal to voters than President Biden.
Opinion media is more successful than news media, than journalism. I think it's related to this lack of curiosity, people looking to be reinforced. Also, it's more expensive. You know this, it's more expensive to actually interview people, to look at documents, to actually explore without knowing ahead of time what is your story. Being able to convert a story into something that's very simple, digestible, and maybe even outraging is more successful. It attracts attention. It's what people talk about.
Breaking just now, an illegal immigrant from Ecuador arrested, apprehended, under arrest, suspected of sexually assaulting, as you said, a teenage girl in a New York City park.
Recently, there was a 13-year-old girl in New York that's been raped by an illegal that's crossed into this country. He tied up.
Now, see, that's enough to make anybody mad. Let me pause that for 1 second here. Hold on. The idea of somebody coming into the country illegally and murdering a child it's a lot for anybody to digest. So the fact that the media utilizes that to, I don't want to say exploit a particular problem, but they use it as an example of a particular agenda that they're trying to push. I get that certain folks feel like that's like making, pointing at certain groups and making them look bad and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of these problems, if nobody said anything about them, we wouldn't even know about it, because everybody lives in different areas and we wouldn't even know. So I don't necessarily appreciate it, but I do understand why it's necessary, because it is information. And I know that it will incite the public if you tell them that somebody did this to a child. So there's no problem there. I get putting them on blast and talking about it was an illegal whatever this, because even though, yes, that does seem to represent a specific political party, that is an issue. You see what I'm saying? Like, even without being politicized, both sides, right? Both sides of the argument agree at minimum that there is an issue, right? So if you want to keep hounding an issue similar to like police shootings with black people, right? People get, shot by police a lot. And percentage-wise, more people who are not black get shot by the police. But most times, when it comes to the footage that gets pushed out into the public, it's the footage that seems to be more controversial, right? And then everybody gets to wilding, and it's like they want us to fight each other over information. It's almost like some sick kind of twisted science experiment. If you think about it, it's like, look, how about we tell these folks this, and then when they do this, then we're going to do this. And like literally plotting out a future plan of messing with people's heads. That's pretty sick. But if you do the studying into propaganda and where a lot of this stuff really came from, that was also part of it. You guys may not remember, because a lot of us are way too young for it, but there was a time when images of black people in cartoons were like real racially driven as far as the features, and they had a whole jigaboo thing going. Like, they literally pushed ideas and ideals into people's heads right through the TV screen. It was when they made television and all that kind of stuff and put it in every house, they were like, now we can influence every house simultaneously. That's crazy. They went from print media, which would get around, but it took time, versus now I can come on at 9 p.m. or 10 a.m. and broadcast this to everybody, and they all get it at the same time. So if I start an uproar, it can start everywhere at the same time. That's why. Let's let Miss Bev finish talking. I forgot what her name was, but she looks like a Miss Bev to me. Miss Bev.
And nothing comes out of the White House about how horrible this is.
According to a new analysis from NBC News, quote, despite several horrifying high-profile incidents, there is no evidence of a migrant-driven crime wave in the United States. In fact,
they are just cherry-picking terrible crimes by immigrants, but they don't mention ever the positive contributions of the immigrants to the.
I need to add some audio to that. Hold on.
To this country.
But is partisan news media in
Make sure you hit that like button. I can't see the streaming stats. Put a thumbs up in the chat if we are still live and you can still hear me.
I've been focused on polarization almost my whole career.
Professor Matt Lewandowski is a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. His research shows that watching certain channels does have an impact on viewers' political opinions.
We showed people the kind of Fox coverage, the MSNBC coverage, or kind of the mainstream news coverage. And what we found was that people tended to move in the direction of the source, right? Especially if it was a source that was congenial to them.
How do you see?
So people move in the direction of people that already agree with them. I mean, that's a natural movement.
Bias or slant in the news media in affecting the way most people think about issues?
Well, there's certainly an effect. I think people who are actively involved in politics tend to be quite polarized, but the country as a whole still has room to come together, find common ground. But the factor working against that is that politicians often have an incentive to divide people.
Lewandowski says both the
they have an
news
incentive.
media and
So what's the incentive to
leaders
divide
who
people?
are often recruited
We're going to get to
from the
that in a
political
second.
extremes during primaries have played a role in deepening our divisions.
Venezuela is releasing thousands of people, criminals, gang members, drug dealers, the worst.
They are trying to control women's bodies quite explicitly.
So if you look at studies about the kinds of people that run for Congress, they're increasingly being drawn from people who are more on the extremes rather than the middle, because the people who are in the middle sort of look out at Congress and they say, where am I going to fit in? So it's pushing people and kind of stretching them out a little bit more towards the extremes.
Well, the thing is, early voting starts in September.
Jerry Levasseur has felt the impact of this growing polarization in her own community and even her own family.
I do have a brother.
A brother?
Who is very liberal, so we just don't talk politics at all, ever.
And what about where they get their news?
They would never watch Fox or Newsmax, or it's MSNBC.
Right, this is how we make it in Turkey, actually.
But 10 minutes down the road, Demet Haksever sees an even greater threat in the coverage coming from Fox, especially its promotion of conspiracy theories about the 2020 presidential election.
This information they spread it about the validity of the election results.
Hold on a second.
2020.
Just to clarify some things, right? There was a bunch of misinformation for a bunch of years. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we spend 3.5 years screaming Russia, 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 and then eventually they were like, oh, yeah, that didn't happen. So that is a normal, is just to get people on something and keep them on something and then just waste their time for a couple of years. That was just, I said that too. If you check some of the old content, I said that. That's a waste of time. And it became a waste of time because the same person that they was wasting their time on is currently running for president again. So whatever they were trying to do, it didn't work. And they spent all that time trying to do it just to hear, oh, he didn't do that. Anyway, let me finish this up. It's like a minute left in here.
Poses a great risk to our democracy. I come from Turkey, and we lost our democracy because of the same divisions.
What happens to a democracy in a situation like that?
Well, democracy dies in that case.
Harvard's Martha Minow says there is no easy solution to this problem. More nonprofit media funding local journalism and fighting disinformation could all help. But she remains deeply concerned about how these divisions are affecting our communities.
The lack of a shared reality is a crisis in America right now.
That's bars.
You can see this depending on what your preferences are. You flip channels or whatever. You see it's different topics, and when it's the same topic, there has no relationship. And if you don't share a reality, and indeed you think the people next to you are out to get you, it's not just democracy that's at risk. It's peaceful coexistence.
That's
In
deep.
an upcoming installment of America at a Crossroads, we'll look at how the internet and social media have only accelerated this concerning trend.
Wow.
The PBS NewsHour. I'm
So I'll
Judy
let the
Woodruff.
PBS joint finish up over here, but that was the PBS piece. I wanted to get through that because it's interesting that PBS, being a media outlet, mainstream technically media outlet, is talking about the bias of mainstream media outlets. It seems like aren't you guys kind of talking about yourself? Like, you were on that list. I mean, I'm just saying, they were on the list that they showed us. So I found it a little funny that they would do that to themselves, kind of like shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak. But I guess if they want to show that they're non-biased, that would be a way to do it, is to tell on themselves, which is what they did. So PBS is cool with me. They try to keep it impartial. They got a few really good segments on PBS. So I'm not going to come down on them, but it's just interesting that they would put out there that they, you know, which groups are more lean more towards particular sides or particular things. So, and they were like number 2 on the list. Like, who does that? Anyway, so we're gonna. All right, thank you. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and do exactly what you know you should do. Come on back to this Purge of BS morning show right here on YouTube and a few other spots. I don't know what the multicast is doing right now. It doesn't matter. So let me finish my topic here, because my question is, to what degree do mainstream media outlets have a responsibility to present non-biased information? I personally don't think they do have a reason to do that. That's probably why the FCC changed all that, because they wanted people to have, they needed people to have a thought. When you just present information, only certain people with certain types of brains will be able to take that information, formulate a cool opinion or whatever, informed opinion, and come up with a, you know, informed decision. Some people, it's like if you put, like I was saying, if you put a whole bunch of food in front of them and they don't know what's what, they don't know what they want to eat first, it's just sitting there and it gets cold. And then they don't want any of it. So they don't receive any of it, right? When you think about what you want from the media, the only non-biased media would be, it don't exist, okay? Let's just, I'm just going to stop thinking, because it's like this. If I'm on here, I have an opinion about certain things, so I'm going to share that opinion. So I can't say that this is a non-bias, because somewhere in it, I'm going to share my opinion. Somebody got upset with me the other day about my opinion on what the concept of when life begins. But that's my opinion. I just was saying how I think. I'm not telling people how to think. I'm just informing you of what's going on in my head. And then I give you a justification for why I think that. And then instead of coming back with some other fact that I can go research, you're just mad because I said it. Not what I said, but just the fact that you're a man. You can you please just give me additional information and I can maybe make a different decision. But if this is what I think now. So that's where the problem is with the media, is the people who take it in the most, pause, they don't have any power over the information that's given to them. It's similar to when I do my research on the internet and the algorithm picks up on my research and then starts feeding me a whole bunch of stuff about one particular topic, and I really was just looking that up for 5 minutes. I don't need that. I don't need that. Then they inundate you with information that militarizes people. I'm telling you, if you really think about some of those terms, if you told somebody that this person was going to take over and do whatever, and this is on both sides. This is on both sides, not even just both sides. This is, yeah, I have to say Democrats and Republicans, because the other parties, when I've heard them speak about it, they don't seem to go with that whole end of earth, your world is going to be destroyed if you do not vote for this person. Like, they don't do that as much in the third parties, libertarian, independent, what is it, the Green Party. Like, those folks seem to just be more about whatever their platform is, and they're like, this is what we stand on, and this is what we're talking about. But it seems like these other groups, the main ones, and did you see that list of networks? That's everybody, pretty much, other than folks on YouTube. And even on YouTube, those same entities exist. Fox, PBS, all of that. So the same news that you're going to see on the TV, you'll find on YouTube. It'll be on X. It'll be the same talking points over and over and over and over and over again, just to get you to feel some way. The problem is not everybody is emotionally disciplined enough to take that kind of negativity in and not want to lash out. And if they can't at least take accountability for that, then maybe we need to not be paying attention to these media outlets. But the problem is those outlets control the flow of information. See, me, if I want to get the new story, like whatever's hot, I don't have a person out in the street who's working on finding me the next scoop. So I have to wait second level. The news will find it. It becomes a story. It comes through the timeline. I find it. So everything I get is filtered through that buffer first. Everything. So when you start looking at it, and you start looking at your information, you start looking at your Google, you start seeing, why is all this pushing me this way? But if I look up something different, one of the most recent examples of this was the coverage of the Kamala Harris interview that she did with Fox News, right? And if you look at certain reviews on the same channels that they just showed you about, you get these starkly different sides of the same thing. And almost to the point where you're like, well, what did I see? Because you saw that, and then you saw that, but I didn't really see all of either of what y'all are saying. Like, I didn't. And where am I supposed to get additional information from? The same place I just got bad information from? I don't know. I wish I could tell people to boycott mainstream media and push all their energy into providing the information for independent and alternative media, but people won't do that because, you know, I don't have the nice haircut situation in the eyebrows like Brett Baier or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I don't have, I don't look like them. I don't talk like them, and most of us don't. But we want it fed to us by them. But that's only because alternative media hasn't been out for long. Watch what happens. Watch what happens when people start really being able to do a lot of research, like the Candace Owens situation. And she's recently, I don't know what they're going to do with Candace. I don't. But she is out there just, I don't want to call it warring at people, but she is definitely speaking her piece and utilizing her platform. So I'm hoping that you know, that works out well for her in the end, because at this point she's been doing, at least she's doing the research, and she's coming back with what she's researching, and does allow you to make your own informed decision about the information that was researched. So that's all I ever ask for. An opinion is an opinion, but if you present to me all of the information and I come to the same opinion on my own, then we are in agreement. But if you bring me the pieces of the opinion, and then you just give me those pieces that you want me to ingest, which are obviously going to swing me into a certain direction, right? That's not fair. It's not fair. And they wonder why they get people out here wilding out trying to shoot folks, and because you're telling them. Let me take y'all back a little bit. Remember just after 9/11 happened and people started lashing out at anybody who had like a turban type situation on, and they were from whole different areas. They weren't even associated with Afghanistan or none of that kind of stuff, but just a certain appearance, and people automatically were like, those guys are terrorists. But what the most important thing that you have to remember is the actual terrorists didn't look like that. I mean, they were brown in that way, but they didn't look like that. They didn't come on there like they didn't look like that. But they gave us the picture and we ran with it. And we start seeing everybody as one swath of something, not even understanding the real culture behind it. And that's not our fault because we don't live there. I don't know. So if you only present me disinformation, that's serious. Then I'm only operating on disinformation. So we got to be vigilant. We got to study. We got to find things that you can't find. You got to dig into the internet. You got to get all the way up in that joint. Pause. You know what I'm saying? You got to press, because the stuff I'm being fed is annoying to a degree. And it's not about politics. It's about people. People do like to feel good. There's nothing wrong with feeling good. I like to feel good. Everything doesn't have to be all fire and brimstone. At the end of the day, I get it, there's an election. And there's some things at stake. But the country's not going to burn down, regardless of who ends up in that spot. Okay? You can rest assured of that. That situation that happened on Jan 6th won't happen again. But on either side, nobody's going to let that happen again. Because when it happened previously, it was kind of the first time it had happened. Response was a little sketchy. That's not going to happen again. So let's get past all of that. Let's get the news to stop feeding us 30 minutes of stuff and telling us that that's the news. There are things going on. There are local elections going on. I watched the debate the other day for local amendments. Pay attention to your local election. We get caught in the fanfare of the presidential election when really, if you haven't learned anything about laws, the state laws are really stronger than the federal ones. Like, if you really think about it. If you take certain things like the Roe v. Wade situation, they put it back in the state's hands. Which was crazy at the time, but that means this, just like legalization of marijuana. You can have legalized marijuana in a state, but it's federally illegal. That's crazy as hell. But to me, that means that the state law kind of outweighs the federal one, at least in the state. Confusing, right? So, like I said, I want to boycott mainstream media, but that's all we got. That's all we got. That is all we got. That's all the information that they think we need is from one side or the other. And then when you go to alternative media, if somebody says something that's not popular, then they end up getting canceled. And then that's, for me, that's what raises my antenna, is when somebody gets canceled for something. I'm like, well, what did they say? And then when you find out what they said, if it's if it seems mild or doesn't make sense, now you start digging and then you start finding out, well, they really didn't do this, or they really did this. But the information is never presented initially, right? How much more do I have to ask for to get real information? How much the internet is just I don't want to call it a virus at this point, but you go on the internet and let's just say you're looking for particular information. If you go on Google, I'm gonna just say Google, okay? Hold on. Woke up the device over there. Anyway, if you go on and do a search, you'll notice the first couple of things that come up are normally sponsored advertisements. Somebody paid somebody to put that in front of you first if you search a certain term. A lot of businesses, smaller businesses don't have money to invest in SEO like that. So it's the larger companies that can influence the search results. The politicians were doing that recently where they were like influencing the search results. For example, they would buy the whole page of ads. So when you looked up something, the whole first page of it was ads that they had sponsored. So it's almost like you have no choice but to select what it is they want you to see. That was crazy, but that happened, and that was recent. And that's a problem for me. Not having control of like the information intake is, for me, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary that we can't control or filter that information. Some of it turns out to be untrue. We got mainstream media outlets issuing rebuttals for certain things that they said or didn't say or should have said or shouldn't have said. Or I don't know what else to say about it, man. Can we boycott mainstream media? No, but we can expect more. We can ask for more. I want more information. I don't want 30 minutes of shit that repeats. I don't like that. Because in that next hour, something else has happened. You're not going to tell me ain't nothing different happened. And then the only time they cut away is like if there's a police chase or something going on. Oh, there's a police chase going on. Now we're watching that for 3 hours while somebody in like an 84 Impala is driving crazy in California. Meanwhile, other stuff is still happening. So you just got to remember, maybe it's the speed of information that I don't like. Filtering, I don't know. I just always feel like I'm being kept from the information I'm seeking in a general sense. I like debate. I like bias if you're allowed to debate it. I don't mind you having an opinion as long as we're allowed to discuss it. That's all I'm saying. I don't mind it. I think that's the most healthy way to get information is to discuss it with other people. I don't know. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. I could be right, too. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm getting ready to get out of here. But, I wonder what would happen if we stopped tuning into mainstream media for like 30 days. I wonder if they would even care. Because it's too many outlets now. So even if you cut off the TV for those that actually watch news on TV, they'll still feed it to you from something else. From Instagram, from Facebook, from something. They'll find a way. They're inundated into everything. So how do you escape it? How do you block that from your mind and just get raw information? I don't really even think that that's possible. I mean, is it? Am I wrong? I don't know. But that, my friends, is definitely some BS. We already know what I gotta do. I gotta go. Peace.